Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to episode 2 of the Chlorophyll podcast. To celebrate the 25th anniversary of Chlorophyll, we have with us Suresh Sethi. We are going to learn from him. Suresh Sethi is the MD and CEO of Protean eGov, formerly NSDL eGov. With your permission, Suresh, I just want to take 5 seconds off to tip a hat to Mandar Karanchkar, my friend who created the sonic identity for the podcast, which you heard. If you liked it, let us know. Now, right back to Suresh. Suresh, easily the most dynamic uh, business head I have met in a very long time. Suresh has been known in the banking circles very well. He was awarded leading practitioner in banking by Asian Banker Association and was named CEO of the Year by another organization. But in my head, what Suresh is famous for is for chasing down what is called as bhags, big, hairy, audacious goals, right from creating a $1 billion brand of Vodafone M-Pesa to creating the Indian Post Payment Bank, which redefined uh, last mile inclusion in this country. So we are going to talk about also about our association, Chlorophyll Association. But I think, Suresh, given the kind of work you have done, I think it's best that we start with two of the biggest revolutionary financial inclusion projects that you did. M-Pesa, you transplanted from Africa to India and made a revolution out of it. Let's hear it from you about M-Pesa first, and then Indian Post Payment Bank. So first, let's hear about M-Pesa.
Sure, Kiran. First of all, good to see you, and thanks a lot for having me here. I was excited to hear the construct of the chlorophyll podcast, and
Yes.
delighted to be here in episode 2. So let's start with M-Pesa. As you rightly said, it was and continues to remain a revolution,
Yeah,
especially for the African subcontinent. Roots were seeded in a very different way.
I
I'll
see.
just give a little bit of history to give you a sense. So, M-Pesa in Africa actually started when there was a certain subsidy by the UK government which needed to be sent to the citizens in Kenya.
I see.
And looking at that, the big challenge was how do you make the money go to them? And Vodacom, or rather the entity, Vodacom is the Vodafone entity in Africa, in Kenya. So they looked at the fact that the telecom player had almost an 85-90% market share. They were the dominant telecom players. So the discussion point came, can we put the money directly on the phone?
Okay.
And that actually started M-Pesa. So it started as a money transfer.
So this
And
name came from where, Suresh?
so M-Pesa in Swahili means mobile money,
Oh,
right? And Pesa is an interesting connotation because when we brought it to India, we also
yeah.
say Pesa. So we actually toyed with the idea, which would be of interest to you, since our association started with identity and naming.
Correct.
We were
Correct.
originally thinking, should we call it M-PAISA? But
Right.
then
Right.
we decided to stick
The
to the
original.
acronym which works so well in Africa. So we left it as M-Pesa. So mobile money became a phenomenal success because people received subsidy on their mobile phones. And while what they even call out today, while the literacy was not there, the people were numerically literate. So
I
they
see.
could start dealing with money. And this then became the primary mode of money transfer from urban to rural Kenya. So people working in urban locations wanted to send money home, and the safest way of doing it was sending it using the telecom network as a mobile financial service. I was actually pleasantly surprised going to Kenya during those days. We once saw a hoarding which talked about the fact that Barclays Bank has now joined hand with M-Pesa because
Wow.
M-Pesa is the dominant money transfer entity, and the banks see it as a position of pride to be associated with M-Pesa. Very
Fabulous.
different from what we see in India.
Correct.
So it has been a game changer for women. It has been a game changer for the sort of inclusion parameters which came alongside it. It became a dominant, again, a person to merchant sort of transaction enabler. And over a period of time, M-Pesa even transformed into a lending, capability, because using the M-Pesa transaction history, they started providing, loans based on the transactional history linked credit scores. So when we looked at India, when we got the license over here, it was a prepaid banking license provided by the Reserve Bank of India. And one of the things which Vodafone took a slightly different approach, rather than enabling basically a person to merchant transaction, we said we'll do what we did very well in Kenya, and we wanted to use it for migrant money transfer.
I
Because
see.
India, as you know, is also a country of migrants. There are
Yes.
urban migrants like you and me. I'm not a Bombayite. I
Correct.
grew up in the north and then moved to Bombay to do work.
Yes.
But there are a lot of people who are in the gig economy who move away from their homes. So
Yes.
how do you enable them to send money back home in a safe, secure manner? And that became our, rallying point. And interestingly, at that time and subsequently, as we worked closely with the Reserve Bank to work out the differentiated banking guidelines for payments bank, the entire interest was that their telecoms have huge distribution networks. Can those networks be repurposed for the purpose of providing banking services, especially in rural and hinterlands? So
Right.
that was the genesis of M-Pesa. And as you rightly pointed out, we reached a point where we leveraged the telecom network. While we were working on a prepaid banking license, we tied up with a banking partner, and we were able to use the ability to send money home, do cash out on the mobile using the banking KYC provision.
Wow.
And it became revolutionary at that point of time. We
Absolutely.
actually went ahead and even started doing collections for large corporates. You have
Yeah. Yeah.
salespeople all over the place. They want to send money into the corporate account. They could just walk into a telecom outlet, deposit the cash, and bingo, the money would go to the corporate account. We were able
Wow.
to enable women working in rural India, especially the self-help groups who had taken loans from financial institutions.
Correct.
Believe me, the loan used to be 100 rupees. The women had to repay installments every week. They would spend 50 rupees to go to the town to make the
Yes.
payment.
Yes.
Your telecom
Yes.
outlets in the village were now able to accept those, 20
Correct.
rupees repayment, and you could just
Yeah.
send it back to the bank account. So there were quite a few revolutionary things which came alongside it. And again, I think it was a great setting for what we see as the, last mile distribution that came
Correct.
out of experiments like M-Pesa.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a absolutely fantastic story. But let's move on to the big one. You were handpicked by the government for to head the India Post Payment Bank, and from what I hear last, it was all sevens, 7 crore customers, 700 crore revenue, 7,000 crore uh, uh, deposits. So tell us the story. What were first? What I think you were publicly commended by even Nanda Nilekani for what you achieved in the IPPB. So barriers, what drove you to do that, achieve that, anything that came up against it? How did you manage all of that?
So, Kiran, that was I would say that was really a defining sort of experience, because clearly working with the government, you realize the sort of impact you can create.
Hmm.
And here, the government, while the regulator issued the payments bank license, in my mind, the government coming forward and saying we will put our biggest asset on the ground to become
Yeah,
a payments bank was, I think, a really revolutionary decision. Because I again, have searched wide, but I've not found a single use case where actually the payments bank was set up under the Ministry of Communication, because that is where India Post is. And our
correct.
governing entity is the Department of Financial Services, sitting in the Ministry of Finance. two ministries came together with the entire, hierarchy
Absolutely.
sitting over there. And here we were repurposing the postal network to provide banking services at the last mile.
Correct. Correct. Correct.
The need of the hour was clear that, there is, as we all say, there is a Bharat and there's an India. So
Yes.
when you go to rural India, at the point we established the bank or prior to that, frankly, the average distance to a bank branch is 5 to 10 kilometers. And when you
Hmm.
look at rural bank branches, they are not like what we see in urban India. But
Yes.
when you cut over to the postal network, the postman has forever been a trusted partner in a village. His
Dakia.
relevance may be waning because no longer do you send letters and he
Correct.
virtually reads your letter. He's the only educated guy in the village, so
Correct.
he's a confidant. He's a trusted partner, and with WhatsApp and SMS and texting, that part was waning. But then the question came that when you go to rural India and you have to trust somebody with your money, a postman with a money order was still the most trusted partner.
Correct. Correct.
And the moment we thought that a Dakia can actually become the last mile agent for both enabling financial and digital literacy, things started falling into place. So we were looking at a single institution which had a network of almost 155,000 points of service,
Wow.
uh, out of which 80% of the network is rural. And the second fact being that today a Dakia is able to reach any house in any village within a matter of 24 hours when they are delivering the post. So
Wow.
we had 350,000 Dakiyas out there whom we equipped with a smartphone, a simple biometric device, and they were able to provide banking services at the last mile. And by virtue of the fact that India is at the cutting edge of building digital public infrastructure, today each
Yes.
of our bank accounts is embedded with a Aadhaar number, our
Right.
national identity. So today when
Correct.
a Dakia comes to your house, you can virtually use your biometric and you can operate your, say, a Citibank or a SBI account through the Dakia. So it is not just your India Post payment bank account, you can operate any account. And
I see.
during
I didn't know
COVID,
that.
yes,
Yeah. Oh.
and during COVID, the Dakia became a big enabler because the government put subsidy into the accounts of the people. And if you remember, none of us could travel to bank branches to operate those
Correct.
accounts. So the
Correct.
Dakia could actually come to your house and give you cash. So he was a life savior at this point of time during the pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
was an amazing exercise, and to your point to say what were the enablers, I think it was an amazing eye-opening experience to work with an institution like India Post. Here was an institution which was on one side steeped in legacy, where we were trying to build or bring in the latest technology. We were looking at postal workers from somebody being 20 years of age because the Dakiyas are actually generational, right? It
I
goes from
see.
father to son to grandson.
Oh.
And there were Dakiyas who were 70 years old. And it was a mission to say that the 20-year-old Dakia and the 70-year-old Dakia should be given equal training and should have the ability to open the bank account in 3 minutes flat. And we were able to
Fantastic.
achieve it with the simplicity of onboarding processes that we created on the mobile device. And we almost spent, I would say, around 10 million hours, man hours of training. So these were some of the big things which happened in the background before the entire postal network came alive as a banking institution. And the entire rural banking infrastructure was scaled up by 2.5 times.
Wow. Fantastic. This is really a goose flesh story. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So let's come down. We started work with you in 2021 when NSDL eGov, which was like the technology backbone of Aadhaar and TIN and PAN and all of that, and was always getting mistaken for doing just government work. And then you use this clever device of branding to leverage the whole thing and to show the world what NSDL eGov actually was, that it became Protean, and then you have close to 16 or 17 verticals under it. So can you talk? When I talk about you, I tell people that you and I have an MAC, a Mutual Admiration Club, but that hasn't been confirmed by you.
No, no, absolutely it is. Absolutely, it is the work you've done in various places to put an identity to a
Yes.
concept, to an idea. I think we are all fans of that.
So let's hear it from you about Protean.
Sure. So I think this was first of all, as an organization, I think it's a phenomenal organization working in the background.
Ah, correct.
And I would start by sharing something with you which we speak about very less. As you rightly said, we are a service agency to UIDI, which is how we provide, account opening services, transaction authentication services wherever you are using Aadhaar, contract signing services where you're doing a signature using e-sign. We do online PAN validation whenever a bank account
Correct.
gets opened.
Correct.
So, Kiran, if you take a working day of 12 hours, let's say, during the day when we actually transact and work, and if I look at the number of transactions that Protean enables, we do enablement of, on the average, 14,000 transactions a minute,
My God.
right? A bank account getting opened, a PAN card getting validated because you purchased a property and you are deducting tax. You are purchasing jewelry, you are deducting tax. You are opening a bank account, you are doing a money transfer, so on and so forth. So that is the sort of the scale we are dealing with over here, and that is what sort of uh, very much brought the interest forward for me to look at this institution and see what sort of impact and scale we can drive out of this. And as you know, we are, and we proudly call ourselves as the digital public infrastructure entity for the country, having started
Correct.
our journey with taxation, and then moving on to building the pension ecosystem, working on the national identity and the tax identity. But where it becomes interesting is that I think Aadhaar was a watershed moment for the country.
Correct.
We
Correct.
started building our digital public infrastructure in a very different way, in a layered manner, right? Identity became a foundational layer. Payments came atop it. On top of it came data and the ability to share data. So, right from who am I to what I do, so what
Correct.
assets I hold and how I can share them, these became the foundational pillars on which now we are doing multi-sector interventions,
Correct. Correct.
be it digital commerce, be it transport and mobility, be it agriculture, health. So that is what really the DPI space we are playing in.
So
And when we
give
looked
us
at
an
the challenge
example.
as
Give us an
yeah,
example of agri-tech, for instance, because that's very
agri-tech,
interesting.
we've actually worked with the government to create the central agri stack. And I'll tell you, agriculture is a state subject. So that is where the agricultural data lies. When I say data, you have farmer database, you have land records, you have crop registries where you are putting the crop information, you have soil health registries. So there are various databases. And think about a scenario where all these databases get digitized,
I see. I
right?
see.
So we worked with the central government to create an architecture for data exchange between state and center. Because since each state in a federated structure will have its own technology, its own interfaces, you want to create one simple interface for data exchange. Secondly, you want to give the consent, which is the power of using the data in the hands of the farmer, so that the farmer can consent to say, I will share this data to either get an insurance, get a loan, an agri loan, get a crop advisory, so on and so forth. So this
Correct.
entire framework was designed by us to enable the agri ecosystem, and that is today being going to be run in a pilot mode with 10 states, which are
Wow.
reasonably advanced in terms of the digitization of land records and soil data and crop data. So that is the work we are doing in the space of agriculture. And
Fantastic.
coming back to the point where you said that the name change. So when I looked at the organization, when somebody said NSDL e-governance, my first reaction was, is it a government entity? More to understand because the word national comes in. And
Correct.
surprisingly, when this company came into being in 1995 as a market infrastructure institution, as the first central securities depository, the government very smartly said, let it run as a for profit entity, but let it be promoted by the large
And
institutions. so that you are able to bring the best of private and public sectors experience and expertise into it. And so three large foundational institutions came in: the National Stock Exchange, IDBI, Unit Trust of India, followed shortly by the capital market ecosystem players, the large banks, SBI,
Correct.
HDFC,
Correct.
the
Correct.
global custodians like Citi and Deutsche. So in all these institutions came together to create what was the depository.
Correct.
And
Correct.
then it moved on to doing tax and pension and so on and so forth. And somewhere in 2015, we also saw a vertical split where the depository business being regulated by SEBI was separated or demerged under NSDL, and the rest of the entity, since it was doing e-governance work, became NSDL e-governance. And when we
Okay.
looked at the fact that our name is still NSDL while we don't do any depository work, we
Correct.
wanted to do a reality check to say, how does a customer perceive us? So as we are going beyond the BFSI sector, we are getting into agriculture, health,
Education.
education, skilling. How should we be perceived? And I think that was an amazing piece of work we did along with you, where we
Yes.
actually went out to our stakeholders and said, what do you see us as? And we got as
Several
varied
thousand.
answers. Yeah,
More than 1,000. Yeah.
absolutely. We got as varied answers as saying you are the depository, or you and depository are subsidiaries or parent
Yes.
and child company, to saying you are the pan issuing company. So there was complete
Correct.
confusion and chaos.
Yes.
And I remember out of the discussion we had, I think you brought out a fact saying you already have the security and trust built into your brand.
Correct.
Now, if we
Correct.
are doing a brand pivot, what do we want to further go with?
Correct.
And
Correct.
the toss up became between saying that should we talk more about security and trust, or should we talk about agility?
Correct.
Because as you look at new age technology, you want to look at the customer call out. You want a
Correct.
company which is agile to the needs of the customer, which can deliver to the customers. And that is where I think we pivoted. And frankly, I didn't know what Protean means, right?
Yeah, yeah. And
Rest
now I
is
think very few people knew that it's an actual English dictionary word, which
yes.
somehow fitted you exactly, you as an organization exactly. One last personal question, Suresh. Um, when I worked on Aadhaar in 2011, the big realization I had was governments are not scared of scale, right? I mean, that phrase "low aim is crime" was invented for certainly for, I haven't worked with other governments, but for the Indian government, they just didn't. A billion is nothing for them.
True.
When you worked on this, when you transited from being a banker to doing this public infrastructure work, is there some realization that came to you that changed you as an individual?
I think the realization, frankly, uh, Kiran, came much before. I think, as I
Right.
mentioned, working very closely during India post, you know, transformation, you actually realize the scale you can touch.
Yes.
You are absolutely right that that was one place where I saw scale and I saw impact at population scale. And
Yes.
then what today Protean does, you're absolutely right. And that is where we talk about the brilliant approach India has to building digital public infrastructure, where
Yes.
you're actually seeing that the government has taken a very, I would say, very sharp look at saying we will build the infrastructure, we'll build it on open source
Correct.
technology, open standards, open protocols, so public and private partnership can thrive.
Right. Right.
Whereas private enterprise can come and build the consumer and corporate applications, because while government is not scared of scale and not scared of building the infrastructure, innovation is best left to everybody being able to
Yes.
contribute, because
Correct.
nobody can take charge and saying only I will innovate in the ecosystem. So I think it's a very balanced play. We've heard Nandan talk about it, so articulate it so brilliantly, saying that
Yes.
it's the middle path.
Yeah.
America, you have the private
Yes.
enterprise holding all the big pieces of
Correct.
infrastructure.
Correct.
And you have China on the other hand, where government wants to do
Government
everything.
rules. Yes.
And
Yes.
here we are sitting in a very sweet spot. The government says, I will build the digital rails. and let the private enterprise innovate atop that.
Flourish on top of it. Yeah. And even that point that I think both Nandan and you made, that unlike the US, here the data empowers the individual. It's the opposite way
Absolutely.
around. You decide what data you want to share, and therefore what facilities you want to get. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
Suresh, I have not thanked you publicly for the confidence that you bestowed in us at that critical juncture when you wanted to change NSDL eGov's identity. So I will do so publicly. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And one last fourth thank you to all our viewers. Chlorophyll loves you. Thank you, Suresh. Thank you for spending time in your busy schedule. Since you are out of India, the last question: do we see Protean going the way of UPI, as UPI has gone all over the world? Will Protean be going all over the world?
Yes, we'd like to take India Stack global. Absolutely. And
Yes,
thank you to you for the fabulous work that you and your team did for us.
right,
We see it playing out day in and day out, especially when we were in the process of listing. It
correct.
was a
Yes,
great conversation
that
opener.
was some listing. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Bye bye.
Thank you.